3 gang members cornered a royal guard. They spat on his boots, mocked his silence. One even reached for his bayonet, convinced he wouldn't move. But 1 minute later, none of them was standing. Want to know exactly how it went down? First, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us where in the world you're watching from. Now let's get into it. It was the kind of spring afternoon that made you forget London could be anything other than tourist brochures and afternoon tea. The sky hung clean and bright over Buckingham Palace, with just enough breeze to set the Union Jack dancing above the gates. Somewhere across the forecourt, a street musician's violin drifted through the chatter of families sharing ice cream and pensioners adjusting their caps for better photos. The usual crowd had gathered behind the black rope barriers. American tourists comparing their cameras, a group of German students sprawled on the steps with guidebooks, parents lifting toddlers for better views. Everyone doing that thing tourists do, where they try to get the perfect shot while pretending they're not just another tourist. Near the rope line, a young boy in a Liverpool FC hoodie kept inching closer to his dad, working up the courage to give the guard a salute. His older sister rolled her eyes. "He's not going to wave back, Tommy. They're not allowed to move." "But what if he wants to?" the boy whispered back. Standing motionless in the forecourt, Corporal Daniel Hale barely registered the conversation. Scarlet tunic pressed to perfection. Bearskin cap sitting tall and precise. Rifle gripped diagonally across his chest in that textbook military stance that takes years to perfect. He'd been holding the post for just under 2 hours, and in that time he hadn't moved more than 2 inches. Not because he couldn't, but because 8 years of service with the Grenadier Guards had taught him something most people never learn: how to stay absolutely still under pressure. The kind of pressure you don't get from photo-hungry tourists. The kind you get on night patrol in Kandahar province, where moving at the wrong moment could get you and your mates killed, where discipline wasn't about ceremony, it was about survival. To everyone watching, though, he was just another piece of British pageantry, like Big Ben or those red phone boxes nobody actually uses anymore. An American tourist with a thick Brooklyn accent gestured toward Hale with his coffee cup. "Man's like a mannequin, I'm telling you. Bet he ain't even real." His wife laughed, already turning toward the gift shop. Probably some wax figure they wheel out to save money on actual soldiers. A tour guide with a small cluster of elderly visitors was explaining the history to anyone who'd listen. "The tradition dates back centuries," she was saying in that practiced voice of someone who'd given the same speech 1,000 times. "These guards have served in combat zones around the world. Afghanistan, Iraq." But most people weren't really listening. They were taking selfies. That was about to change. Because across the square, a dark sedan had just pulled up to the service road where no vehicles were supposed to stop. And the 3 men climbing out of it weren't here for the gift shop. The car didn't belong, not in that lane, not at that speed. It cut in sharp from the mall and rolled right up to the outer perimeter near the east gate, engine idling with that particular kind of arrogance that makes security guards reach for their radios. One of the stewards clocked it immediately. Head turning, hand moving toward his radio, that subtle shift in posture that happens when professionals sense something's wrong. The engine shut off. 3 car doors slammed in quick succession. Out stepped 3 men who moved like they owned whatever space they entered. Black hoodies, low-billed caps, and that particular swagger that makes crowds part without being asked. 2 of them had gang tattoos, easy to spot on the knuckles and neck. The third was already filming with his phone as they walked. They weren't trying to blend in. That was the point. The tallest one led the way. Broad shoulders, scar running down his jawline like an old argument. His grey hoodie was faded from wear, but he walked with the confidence of someone who'd never lost a fight that mattered. Behind him, 2 others, lighter builds, harder eyes, the kind of restless energy that makes trouble without looking for it. "Oi, what's this then?" muttered an elderly man in a veteran's cap, instinctively stepping back from the rope line. A few tourists started drifting away, that universal sixth sense that tells you when a situation might turn. One of the stewards moved forward, clipboard in hand, trying to project authority he probably didn't feel. "Gentlemen, you can't park there. This is a protected ceremonial zone." The one with the phone just grinned, panning the camera slowly toward the guard. Yeah, mate, just want a bit of footage. Nothing wrong with that, is there?" But the air had changed. You could feel it. That electric tension that builds when something's about to go wrong. Parents were pulling children closer. The college students had stopped reading and were now watching with the nervous fascination of people who sensed they might be witnessing something significant. Daniel Hale didn't shift his stance, didn't even blink. But beneath that perfect ceremonial stillness, something had clicked into place. He'd seen walks like that before, not here in London, but in places where calm never lasted long. In Lashkar, in Sangin, in alleyways where the wrong move at the wrong time meant someone wasn't coming home. The discipline that kept him motionless wasn't just parade ground training. It was forged in observation posts where he'd held overwatch for hours, muscles cramping, sweat pooling under his gear, but never shifting, because lives depended on his vigilance. He didn't know what these three wanted, but every instinct, honed by years of combat deployment, was telling him this wasn't just street theatre. This was a test. The leader, Malik, though nobody knew his name yet, didn't bother with subtlety. He led his crew straight toward the ceremonial rope like he was claiming territory. His grey hoodie hung loose over a frame, built for intimidation, and the scar along his jaw caught the afternoon light as he surveyed the scene with the calculating eye of someone who'd been testing boundaries his whole life. Behind him, Trey and Darnell spread out with casual precision, not random, not impulsive. They'd done this before, maybe not here, maybe not with a royal guard, but the choreography was practiced. One would distract, one would record, one would push until something broke. They'd been riding through London for the better part of the afternoon, getting increasingly frustrated with traffic wardens and speed cameras, and all the rules that made the city feel like one big "keep off the grass" sign. "Bunch of uptight pricks," Trey had muttered as they'd been moved along from their last stop near Westminster Bridge. "Think they're better than everyone else with their fancy traditions." Now they'd found what looked like the perfect target, someone who couldn't fight back. Someone surrounded by tourists who wouldn't intervene, someone they could finally push around without consequences. At least that's what they thought. Phones started coming up as they approached the rope barrier. Not filming with amusement anymore, this felt different, tense. The kind of moment that might need to be shown to someone in authority later. The teenage boy in the Liverpool hoodie grabbed his sister's arm. Are they allowed to do that? She was older, supposedly wiser, but suddenly wasn't sure about anything. I don't think so. Malik stepped over the ceremonial rope, like it was a piece of string lying on the pavement, just ignored it completely. His crew followed, spreading out in a loose semicircle as they approached Hale's post. The steward hurried over, one hand raised in that nervous way of someone who knows they're outmatched, but has to try anyway. "Sir, you're in breach of ceremonial boundaries. You're going to have to ask me to what?" Malik cut him off, without even looking at him, eyes fixed on the motionless guard. "We're just tourists, mate. Friendly visit." But nobody was buying it. The crowd had gone quiet. Not the respectful quiet you get during the changing of the guard, but something else, electric. Like everyone could feel violence building in the air, but nobody wanted to be the first to say it out loud. Darnell circled around to Hale's left side, just outside his peripheral vision, phone raised and recording. "Let's see what they do if we crowd him a bit," he muttered, loud enough for the microphone to catch. Hale didn't react, didn't even blink. But if you knew what to look for, and most people didn't, you could see the subtle shift in his breathing, the almost imperceptible adjustment of his grip on the rifle. He was tracking every movement, cataloguing every threat, calculating distances and angles with the automatic precision of someone who'd survived places where that kind of awareness kept you alive. In his peripheral vision, he could see the tourists starting to back away. The elderly couple had stopped sharing their thermos of tea and were whispering to each other in concerned tones. Even the college students had put away their phones, suddenly less interested in documenting whatever was building here. Trey stepped closer, grinning at the camera. Is he battery-powered or something? Not even a twitch? The others were getting bolder now, feeding off each other's energy the way groups do when they think they've found an easy target. Malik started walking in slow circles around Hale's position, like he was inspecting a statue in a museum. I heard somewhere they're not even allowed to move, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. That right, soldier boy? You trained to just stand there and take whatever anyone dishes out? No response. Just that same steady, forward stare. Imagine that being your job, Trey chimed in, emboldened by the silence, standing around in fancy dress while people poke at you. The steward tried again, his voice getting higher with desperation. This is Crown property. You need to step back immediately. Or what? Malik turned his attention to the poor man, that predatory smile spreading wider. Your toy soldier here gonna arrest us. A few uncomfortable chuckles from his crew. The crowd wasn't laughing. Behind the scenes, things were already in motion. In the Palace Security Operations Room, someone had flagged the feed from Camera 7, the one with the clear view of the ceremonial post. A duty officer was already on the phone with the Royal Military Police, his voice calm but urgent. We have a developing situation at the main ceremonial post. Multiple subjects inside the perimeter, no weapons visible yet, but they're escalating. The stewards on the ground were getting more agitated by the second. One of them, a young man who'd only been on the job for 3 months, kept looking between the confrontation and his radio, clearly wanting to call for immediate backup, but not sure if he had the authority. But backup takes time, and these 3 weren't planning to wait. Malik stepped closer to Hale, close enough that his breath fogged slightly in the spring air between them. Close enough that the cameras could catch every detail of what he was about to do. Come on then, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Do something. Prove you're not just another pretty puppet. The pressure in the air shifted, like the moment before lightning strikes. The crowd felt it. Parents instinctively moved their children back another step. The woman with the stroller whispered to her husband, "Why isn't someone stopping this?" Because he hasn't moved yet, the husband thought, but didn't say. And somehow everyone understood that once the guard did move, if he moved, everything would change. Darnell crouched down beside Hale's boots, pretending to tie his shoelace, except he was wearing slip-on trainers. It was pure theatre, a move designed to humiliate, to test boundaries, to see how far they could push before something snapped. "Don't they say these boys are trained killers?" he said, grinning up at the camera. "Funny way to show it." Still no reaction from Hale, but something in the air had shifted. That subtle change you feel before a storm breaks, the pressure dropping, the silence deepening. Trey reached out and flicked one of the brass buttons on Hale's tunic. Just a quick tap, testing for a reaction. Nothing. "Statue," he snorted to the camera. "Told you!" But Malik wasn't satisfied. Something about Hale's complete stillness was getting under his skin. Maybe it was the way the guard hadn't even acknowledged him, like he was beneath notice. Maybe it was seeing his own face reflected in those polished buttons, looking small and petty against all that discipline. Whatever it was, it made him want to push harder. He moved closer still, until his forehead nearly brushed the bearskin cap. "You gonna blink, soldier boy? Or are you really just another pretty puppet they wheel out for the tourists?" Then he did something that crossed every line there was to cross. He reached for Hale's rifle. Not grabbing it, just trailing his fingers along the bayonet scabbard, slow and deliberate, testing, daring. "Do not touch the weapon!" the steward practically shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. Hale's grip shifted, just slightly. A tightening of fingers that spoke of reflexes, honed by years of training and months of holding overwatch positions, where the wrong movement could get your entire section killed. Still, he didn't look down, didn't speak, didn't break. The crowd had gone completely silent now. Even the children seemed to sense that something had crossed an invisible line. Phones were still out, but they weren't filming with amusement anymore. This felt like something that might need to be shown to investigators later. For a heartbeat, everything balanced on the edge of a knife. Then Malik leaned in close enough that only Hale could hear him and whispered the words that changed everything. "Make me stop." It was said like a challenge, like a sneer, like someone who'd never met real discipline and couldn't imagine what it looked like when it finally moved. That was his mistake. Because Corporal Daniel Hale had learned something in 8 years of military service that Malik never would. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is stand perfectly still. Right up until the moment when standing still would mean letting something worse happen. And that moment had just arrived. What happened next wasn't dramatic, wasn't telegraphed. There was no Hollywood wind-up, no dramatic pause for effect. There was just the sudden, precise application of 8 years' worth of military training delivered with surgical accuracy. Malik's fingers were still curled around the bayonet scabbard when Hale's left hand snapped up in a blur, seizing the man's wrist and twisting it down with the kind of precision that makes resistance impossible. It was a technique called kotagaishi, wrist control that applied pressure to joints in a way that turned the body's own leverage against itself. Malik's knees buckled and he hit the cobblestones hard, the sound echoing across the square like a gunshot. Before the first gasp could escape from the crowd, Hale had already turned toward the second threat. Trey was lunging forward, fist cocked back, face twisted with rage and disbelief. But anger makes you predictable. And Hale had been trained to exploit predictability. He sidestepped like he was dancing, swept the man's lead leg out from under him, and used Trey's own momentum to flip him over his shoulder in one fluid motion. The technique was textbook judo, ippon seoi nage, shoulder throw, and Trey landed flat on his back with a bone-jarring thud that knocked the wind out of him completely. Darnell tried to rush from the side, phone forgotten, swinging wild and emotional. But combat training teaches you that angry people telegraph their moves like neon signs. Hale caught the man's wrist mid-swing, shifted his weight low, and drove his shoulder into Darnell's chest. Another shoulder throw, perfect form, devastating effect. The man hit the ancient stones and stayed down, groaning and trying to remember how to breathe. From first movement to final takedown, less than 60 seconds had passed. And then silence. Hale straightened, adjusted his grip on his rifle, and returned to his ceremonial stance. Same spot, same posture, same forward stare. Like nothing had happened at all. The only sounds were the soft groans of 3 men scattered across the cobblestones and the flutter of pigeon wings from somewhere overhead. The only sign that Hale had moved at all was the slight expansion of his chest as he regulated his breathing back to ceremonial baseline. "Did you see that?" the boy in the Liverpool hoodie shouted, wide-eyed and gripping the rope barrier. No one answered, because they were all still trying to process what they'd just witnessed. This wasn't street fighting or bar-room brawling. This was something else entirely. Controlled, precise, professional. Like watching a surgeon work, if surgeons specialized in neutralizing threats without breaking a sweat. The crowd erupted. Not wild cheering, but that kind of amazed applause you get when people have just seen something they didn't know was possible. The sound built and spread, carrying with it a mixture of relief, awe, and newfound respect. You could see it in their faces, the moment of understanding. These weren't just people clapping for a performance. They were witnessing the moment when they realized everything they thought they knew about these ceremonial soldiers was wrong. A woman with a stroller turned to her husband, her voice hushed with disbelief. "Did that guard just—" "Yes," he nodded, still staring at Hale's motionless form. "He did." The teenage girl grabbed her little brother's arm. "Did you see how fast he moved? That wasn't luck." Tommy, who'd been building up courage all afternoon to salute the statue, now stood perfectly still himself, eyes wide with a new kind of respect. "He's not just pretending to be a soldier," he whispered. "He really is one." An older man in a veteran's cap stepped forward, his eyes bright with recognition. "That's what real training looks like," he said to no one in particular. "Not the Hollywood stuff, the real thing. Minimum force, maximum effect." For a moment, the three men just lay there, groaning, stunned, trying to figure out what had hit them. Malik propped himself up on one elbow, his earlier swagger completely gone, replaced by something that might have been the first dawning of genuine respect, or maybe just pain, hard to tell. "What the hell?" he muttered, cradling his wrist. He looked around at his crew, all of them flat on their backs or curled up, nursing various injuries, and then back at Hale, who stood exactly as he had before, as if the last minute had been just another part of his ceremonial duty. The reality of what had just occurred was sinking in for everyone. This wasn't some street altercation that had gotten out of hand. This was precision, professional, the kind of response that spoke of years of training and the discipline to use exactly the amount of force necessary, no more, no less. Trey was the first to really get it. "Jesus," he whispered, staring up at Hale with something approaching awe. "He's not ceremonial, he's the real thing." Darnell was trying to sit up, wincing with each movement. I thought they were just for show." "Yeah," Malik said quietly, his earlier arrogance completely gone. "So did I." But nobody was looking at them anymore. All eyes were on Hale, still standing at perfect attention, rifle held with unwavering military precision, face unreadable beneath the bearskin cap. He'd said nothing, explained nothing, boasted about nothing, but in under a minute he'd answered every question anyone might have had about what kind of man actually wore that uniform. The Royal Military Police arrived with that particular kind of efficiency that makes smart people start cooperating immediately. No sirens, no drama, just the quiet competence of professionals handling a situation that had already been resolved. Behind them walked Captain Sarah Thorne, 40s, composed, with the bearing of someone who'd seen enough to know when something was worth her personal attention. She absorbed the scene in one sweep. The crowd, the suspects being helped to their feet, the perfectly positioned guard who hadn't moved from his post. She stopped just short of Hale's position. "Corporal!" Hale's eyes shifted down, just barely. "Ma'am." "Any injuries?" "None, ma'am. Still fit for duty." Captain Thorne studied him for a beat longer, taking in the scuffed glove, the slight adjustment in stance that spoke of recent action. Then she nodded once, crisply. "Very well, carry on." As the RMPs began processing the three men, helping them to their feet, collecting the dropped phone, taking preliminary statements, a young man in the crowd spoke quietly to his girlfriend. "That wasn't violence," he said, still staring at Hale. "That was control." She nodded slowly, her own phone forgotten in her hand. "That wasn't some guy in a funny hat. That was a soldier." And suddenly, finally, everyone was starting to understand what they'd just witnessed. This wasn't about proving a point or showing off. It was about holding the line, about knowing exactly how much force was necessary and using precisely that amount. No more, no less. Daniel Hale hadn't moved until he absolutely had to. And then he'd moved like a man who'd never forgotten who he was beneath the pageantry. Within 20 minutes, the forecourt was back to something approaching normal. The scuff marks had been swept clean. The rope barriers were straight. The three men were gone, processed through whatever system handles people who mistake ceremony for weakness. But the atmosphere had completely changed. Where before there had been casual tourist chatter and the casual disrespect that comes from thinking something is just for show, now there was something closer to reverence. People weren't just taking selfies anymore, they were paying attention, really looking at the guard instead of past him, understanding that they were in the presence of something real. A little girl near the front straightened her back and gave a small, solemn salute. Her father adjusted his camera strap without raising it. Some moments don't need photographs. The same boy who'd been working up courage all afternoon finally stepped forward, but instead of the casual wave he'd planned, he stood at attention himself and rendered a perfect salute. Hale didn't respond, couldn't respond, but somehow the boy understood that the respect had been received and acknowledged. His sister, watching from behind, felt something shift in her understanding of what courage actually looked like. It wasn't about being loud or aggressive. It was about standing perfectly still until the moment when standing still would mean letting something worse happen. And then moving with exactly the precision the situation demanded. A few tourists had started leaving, but most stayed. They seemed to understand they'd witnessed something rare, a moment when the curtain had been pulled back, when they'd seen the reality behind the ceremony. Word was already spreading through the crowd and beyond it. You could see people on their phones, not filming now but calling friends, trying to explain what they'd just seen. "You should have been here," one woman was saying into her phone, her voice still shaking slightly with adrenaline. "These guards, they're not what you think they are. They're not what anyone thinks they are." Behind them, the elderly veteran stepped forward again. He studied Hale's perfect posture, the unwavering discipline, the complete return to ceremonial stillness. Then he spoke just loud enough for those nearby to hear. That wasn't ceremony back there. That was control. The kind of control that only comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're capable of. No one needed to respond. Because whatever they'd thought about these soldiers before, whatever jokes had been whispered or dismissive comments made, it had all changed in the space of 60 seconds. Not because Hale had fought back, but because he hadn't. Not until it was absolutely necessary. And then only exactly as much as the situation required. No more, no less. Just enough to restore order and protect the dignity of the institution he served. He stood exactly as he had before. Same scarlet uniform. Same stillness. Same silence. But now everyone who saw him understood what lay beneath the surface. The training, the discipline, the controlled strength that most people would never see, because most people would never push hard enough to make it necessary. As the afternoon light began to soften and the Union flag continued its lazy dance in the spring breeze, one truth settled over the forecourt like a benediction. Real strength doesn't announce itself, it simply stands ready. And when the moment comes, when someone crosses that line and forces your hand, you respond with exactly the precision your training demands. No more, no less, just enough. Because that's what discipline really looks like. Not the absence of power, but the perfect control of it. So here's the question we're left with. Would you have stayed still that long? Could you have kept your calm, your discipline with three men surrounding you, testing you, waiting for you to break? Or do you think ceremonial soldiers deserve more respect now that you know what kind of training actually goes into wearing that uniform? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one of them, and these conversations matter more than you might think. If this story made you see Royal Guards in a new light, if it showed you something about what real strength looks like, hit that like button. It genuinely helps more than you know. Subscribe and tap that notification bell so you never miss our daily stories about the remarkable men and women behind these ancient traditions. And if you know someone who still thinks the guards are just for show, share this video with them. Let them see for themselves what 60 seconds of perfect control really looks like. Your next Royal Guard story is waiting on your screen right now. Click it, and we'll see you tomorrow with another moment that proves the same truth over and over again. Real strength doesn't announce itself. It simply stands ready. And when it finally moves, the whole world stops to watch.